So yeah, for sure. First. That works. Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Jewish Life Cycles. Hanukkah is over. At least it's been over for the last couple of hours now, almost. And so we are on back to our regularly scheduled programming with a class on Jewish life cycles. Today, we are going to, even though it seemed like we finished off the topic of Pidyon Haben already, and today we're all ready to talk about Chinuch, the next step in the Jewish life cycle, educating one's children. We're not quite ready for that yet because I have a special video to show of an actual Pidyon Haben, my nephew's Pidyon Haben, and this is a video that even my brother didn't know about. Finally, I know something that he doesn't know. And so this is a video of him doing a Pidyon Haben for his son. So I'd like to share that with you, if I may. How do we do this? Optimize for video clip. That's that. Do you still hear me? Shane, will show me a thumbs up if you hear me. All right, good. So good. I'm going to narrate or try to narrate the video as we do. Oh, okay. You're going to go there. Here we are. Okay, so here's the video. That's my wife there on the left. That's my middle there. That's my sister-in-law, and that's my brother carrying a pillow, or actually a tray with jewelry that they had absconded from their guests right before this video was taken. And there's a little 1-month-old baby on top of that tray. So remember, there's a meal going on, they're singing, they're talking, they're doing whatever they're doing, and everything is interrupted for this, right? So it's in the middle of the meal. Here he is. There's the Kohen to the right of him. And I forget who, my brother would know the name of this particular Kohen, but he's a Talmid Chacham, and he's done this before, and he knows what he's doing. So here's the process. Basically, the father of the child, that's the one holding the baby, gets comfortable. Am I taking this video? I don't remember. I thought it was there. Okay. So at this point, again, he tells the Kohen in Hebrew, Aramaic, whatever it is. He reads the passage that basically says that he is willing to give his son to the service of the Beit HaMikdash, which is, of course, we don't do anymore. The Levium took that responsibility from the firstborns ever since the Jewish people sinned with the golden calf. And the Kohen says, no need. Just give me the money instead, basically. And seems like there's a father in the background explaining what's going on to his son. Chinuch. Hey, this is a class about Chinuch. Perfect. There's no audio in this video. We're not really sure why not. Technology. And so he gives him the money. There's the money. Cohen has to make sure it's real. And I guess he liked it, or he says it's good enough. This is what he's going to give. Then the father of the boy reads the proper paragraphs, gives the money with his right hand into the right hand of the Kohen. Kohen lifts it up and then waves it around the child. Says that this money is taking the place of this child, much like kaparot, as we mentioned before. And at this point, traditionally, the Kohen gives the baby a blessing, which the Kohen probably knows by heart by now because, he's a Kohen. The famous 25 words of the Birkat Kohanim. Baby looks like he's crying. Oh, stop it, Gershon. Relax. You'll get over this. And he makes a baby agafen, drinks, and this is before COVID. He's doing it properly. He's sitting down. You're supposed to eat and drink only sitting down. She told you he's a Talmud Chacham. All right, and then everybody's singing, dancing. Everybody's happy. All right, so there's probably more to the video. At some point in the meal, the father of the baby also. I don't know if you can see the tray very well. I mean, they try to make it comfortable with it. Oh, good. Oh, look at that. I'm trying to focus with terrible camera work here. Not bad. All right. Either way, there's the baby. There's usually like jewelry around here. And that's that. I think it's a good place to pause the video. You saw an actual Pidyon Haben. You know what's interesting about this video is that it's screen sharing has stopped.
I have a question. Can a Pidyon Haben be done anywhere or only at shul?
Anywhere.
Okay, thank
you. Not in a dark, scary alley, but any kosher looking, no church, but anywhere where you can do anything. It doesn't have to be in a shul. It's usually in a shul just because, for convenience sake, that particular Pidyon Haben was like in the basement of a shul, if I'm not mistaken. That's just because you want to have as many people as possible. I went to the Pidyon Haben of Shimon Hirsch Dimenstein, and that was at his house.
Mm-hmm.
That was at their house. I remember that.
Okay.
Think of any other ones I've been to. Anyway, so no, it does not have to be in the shul. Good question.
Okay.
Later on in the video, I'm pretty sure there's my brother begins to give a speech, which is very typical. The father of the boy usually gives a speech, much like at a Brit Milah, where the father gives a speech about Dvar Torah, about the name. Here, usually the custom is to obviously not talk about the name because that's been done a month earlier. Okay, 3 weeks earlier, but now is the time to talk about what Pidyon Haben means, and basically the things we said in this class are the types of things that are said in that speech. Okay, anyway, that's Pidyon Haben.
I have a question, Rabbi. Last week we did Pidyon Haben. I'm not sure what's the date today.
I believe it's the 6th of December.
Okay. Beseder. Didn't we do Pidyon Haben last week?
Before we started Hanukkah, yes, we had Pidyon Haben, and we talked a little bit about Upsharon, and then our next topic for today was supposed to be education, Chinuch.
Yeah.
And what I said in the beginning of the class, right when we started, was that I found this video to help us basically strengthen our understanding of Pidyon Haben. Even though I described it in words, now you actually see it in action, and I narrated what we learned before, just so you have a better idea of what it looks like.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I'm on the.
You're in the right class.
Okay,
you came into the right class. This isn't Pidyon Haben 101 anymore. We're gonna say. I think actually that helps me segue to the next topic, which we already also discussed, and that was Upsharon. And I wasn't very well prepared to speak about Upsharon before, and I'm not much more prepared now. But I want to make a couple of things clear. I was rewatching what I said, and I came off sounding very negative about the thing. I want it to be very clear. The Upsharonish is an ancient custom, at least as old as Hasidic thought altogether. So it's at least 400 or 500 years old. And Jewish people have been doing it for many, many years. And again, for those of you who weren't in that class, let me explain what an Upsharonish or Upsharon is. It's basically a male child for the first 3 years of life does not receive a haircut until after his 3rd birthday. And then there's sort of a ceremony that's done. There's you sit the boy down. People are invited to take shots at the boy, to cut some of his hair, and there's usually a aleph bet sort of celebration. He gets his first pair of tzitzit. He wears a kippah for the first time usually, or or something like it, or a hat, whatever he's comfortable with. So all of that happens at that particular ceremony. So I didn't want to make it sound, even though I particularly don't have that custom, and I didn't have one when I was, well, I didn't have almost anything when I was younger, but in terms of Jewish observance, being about teshuva. But aside from that, I didn't give a upsharon to my son. And if somebody were to ask me if they should have an upsharon, I would probably, under most circumstances, probably say no. But that's not because there's anything wrong with it. It's more because, from my experience, the upsharon does not fulfill its purpose. Again, from my experience, if it's your custom to have one, by all means have it. If you are a Baal Teshuva, or if you are a ger or gioret, and you're thinking about, maybe we should have an upsharon for our son. A lot of our family, or a lot of our friends, not family, a lot of our friends have them. So maybe we should have it too. So if they were to ask me, I would say not to. And the reason isn't because it's a bad thing, but mostly because I don't think it fulfills its purpose. What do I mean by that? What is the purpose of an upsharon? So the purpose of an upsharon is to get a child ready for chinuch. The whole point, the whole aleph bet ceremony, and the tzitzit and the kippah, and all of this is supposed to inspire the child to want to do mitzvot for the rest of his life, which is a beautiful idea. But in my experience, again, my personal experience, an upsharon is usually traumatic for the child more than anything else, because all these random strangers, to them strangers, to you it's like your friends and colleagues and whatever, but to the child it's a bunch of strangers coming up to their head with clippers and cutting their hair for the first time. The first haircut, anyways, and it can be a traumatic experience for a child. You look a certain way. You look in the mirror, you know what you look like. Then one day you look in the mirror and you look completely different, like no hair on your head. So it can be a very shocking experience. Part of the because it's a Hasidic custom, part of an upsharon, really almost like the main part of the haircut of the upsharon, is to cut everything but the peyot. Right, to leave peyot, like really real peyot, not just strings, but like from the whole corners of the head, the kind of peyot that Hasidim traditionally have. So if you're just getting your child a haircut and it's going to look like any other Gentile haircut out there, again, it's not fulfilling the purpose of the upsharon. I mean, again, this is not to make fun of people who don't have peyot. We talked about halachot of peyot last time a little bit, but that's not within the scope of the class. What it really boils down to is, do you think it's going to have the effect on your child that it's supposed to have? In other words, is it just are you doing this? And this, by the way, this is a good place to start with the whole concept of chinuch, by the way. What we often, the mistakes we make in chinuch, the mistakes we make in educating our children, very often has to do with what we want it to look like for others. And we care very little, unfortunately, sometimes about what it's supposed to be for the child himself. I'll give you an example. This is a very scary example, and might be scarier for the. It's really a nightmare story in the yeshiva world. This story, and I'll tell you the story, and then you'll take from it what you will. A religious family came to Rav Moshe Shapiro, Zecher Tzarech Livracha, passed away a couple of years ago. So they came to him and is in Jerusalem, and they asked him what yeshiva they should send their child. There's basically, I'm not going to go into names, but there's basically of the yeshivas in Israel. I mean, I'm talking about post-high school yeshivas, the Beit Midrash program, the yeshiva program. There's basically two top-tier yeshivas to go to. I'm not going to go into names. All right. So if you know the names, good. If you don't, doesn't matter. It's not relevant. The point is, this father wanted to know from Moshe Shapiro which yeshiva he should send his son, which one of those two. And Moshe Shapiro had met his son, and he told the father, you know what? The truth is, your son would actually probably benefit more from yeshiva number 3. And he names another yeshiva. And the father is embarrassed and says, what do you mean? That's the yeshiva for losers. That's the yeshiva for like the people who can't handle real like tough learning. I'm talking about Harvard, I'm talking about Princeton, and you name me Grossmont College. Like, no offense to Grossmont College, I went there too. We call it Harvard on the Hill. It's probably the best education in this town. No exaggeration, by the way, because you get the best professors for much less price and much smaller class sizes where they actually care about you, which is another idea about chinuch, but we're not going to get into that right now. Anyway, so like I'm talking about the big names, the Ivy Leagues of yeshivas. You're talking about like community college level. What's going on? So the Rav Moshe Shapiro said, the truth is, I met your son. I noticed in him that he has a certain tendency, he's a very serious boy. Yes, he learns well, it's true, and he could probably keep up with the learning in those yeshivas, but the kind of seriousness that he has needs to be nurtured. And those yeshivas don't really nurture that. He needs to go to this third yeshiva, which, yes, the level of learning is a little bit less, but if you're asking my opinion, I would say he should go there because that's where he's going to be nurtured emotionally the way he needs. The father said, I'd be embarrassed to even say this to my son. It's gonna depress him. So the Reb Moshe said, yes, maybe you have to talk to him gently about it. You have to tell him that this is what I said based on these are my thoughts based on what I know about the boy. I might be wrong, but I'm these yeshivas don't seem right to me. The father went home, ignored what he heard from this dat Torah, this opinion of Torah that he got. He sent his son to one of those top 2 yeshivas, and exactly as Reb Moshe Shapiro said would happen, the boy basically became depressed, got turned off from the whole learning system, and eventually left Judaism altogether. Nightmare situation. Not to belabor the point too much, when we talk about chinuch and educating children, the number one biggest fear, the number one thing that we're trying to avoid most of all is our children leaving Judaism, right? Not just intermarrying, but leaving Judaism. And I have friends who are no longer observant, right? Or maybe never have been. And they brag about the Hanukkah candles that they lit last night with their non-Jewish boyfriends, girlfriends, eating their mother-in-law's non-kosher cookies. Like, what are you doing? Like, what's the Judaism here? The menorah? You're spreading light? What are you doing? What kind of light are you spreading? I don't want to get, again, like I said, I didn't want to belabor the point, but really the point of chinuch is to do whatever it takes to teach the children to love Judaism. It doesn't mean a fake Judaism, obviously. It doesn't mean to lie about Judaism to make it sound nicer when it seems harsh, or to sound more harsh when it's too liberal. It's to teach children to love Torah, to love mitzvot, and to stay in it to win it, right? Every single parsha, by the way, it's fascinating, really. And I think that I know for a fact that there's books written on the subject, but every single parsha has lessons in chinuch, and we almost every parsha class we talk about some of these lessons. We quoted Rav Moshe Feinstein a few weeks ago talking about chinuch. So it's interesting that there's a pasuk in this week's parsha, Bereshit 44:34, where Yehuda talks about, he's again arguing to Yosef about how can he go back empty-handed to Yaakov. He says, how will I go up to my father if the boy is not going to be with me? Let me not see the misery that will befall my father. So there's a deeper way to read this pasuk. So if Mordechai Eliyahu in Darchei Hora writes that there's another way to understand this verse. It's not just that story. We can take that verse out of its context. And the question is, how will we stand before our Father if our children aren't with us? Right? In other words, again, how will I go up to my Father if the boy is not with me? What kind of response will we have if we go up after 120 years and our children aren't with us? I mean, obviously not if they're, God willing, they'll be alive and well, but if they're not holding Jewishly where they should be, how will we respond to that? That is a major question. And he said that throughout the Torah, you have little hints about ways to educate your children, to turn them into Talmidei Chachamim, God-fearing Jews, the prayers that women say when they light Shabbat candles, right? We want to raise our banim and our banot to be good, faithful, honest people, Talmidei Chachamim, right? So it is actually a story about Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu that he came to shul on a Friday night, and he said, it seems very dark in here. And so they're like, all the lights are on. What should we do? So somebody was about to send for a Shabbat goy to turn on more lights. And he said, no. Chas v'shalom, Shabbat. I don't need more lights. It's just dark in here for some other reason. So there's an optometrist in the crowd. And he's like, maybe I could check your eyes. He says, no, that's not the problem. The problem is it's dark in here. There aren't any children. It's a shul. It's a Friday night. Where are all the kids? We have an additional problem. Where are all the men? Where are all the women? It's a Friday night. Used to be, I remember not so long ago when a Friday night meant everybody would come to sing the Chadodi together. And it was the Kabbalat Shabbat was something to show up for. That's we're missing that a little bit. But one of the things that we're definitely missing is that we're missing the children. We need the children to be present. We need the children to know that shul is a place to go to feel holiness. It's not just a place to play and not just a place to eat on the eating holidays. Right? It's a place to come to feel something greater than themselves, to grow somehow. That's part of chinuch also. They need to see their fathers, they need to see their mothers coming to shul, coming on time. I know that sounds difficult, right? Coming on time, not leaving in the middle, not leaving towards the end, not waiting by the door. It's a funny little story, true story. Just yesterday, it was because it was Rosh Chodesh and Hanukkah, the services were a little bit longer, and usually they end before 9 in the morning. We start at 8, we end by 9. But there's Hallel and there's Musaf and there's a Torah reading, 2 Torahs. It was a very nice thing. By 9:15 we weren't 9:15 we were is about when we finished. 9:14 the door was packed with people trying to get out. It was like 3 or 4 people were in the doorway just waiting for the Chazan to finish. It was something to behold. Unfortunately, that's not the ideal here. We're not trying to to lose people. We want them to be inspired. We want these children to see that shul is somewhere to stay, not somewhere to run out from. It happens to be the minyan was made by somebody who's visiting from out of town. He was here with his son, and as soon as the 9:15 bell rang and services are over and everybody rushed out, he and his son stayed and learned. Right? That's what you're supposed to do with your son in shul. You're not supposed to teach them to run out. You're supposed to teach them to stay and to learn and to grow. So that's part of chinuch for boys and girls, by the way. How that's done, there are different methods. Just practically speaking, from what I've found to be effective with my children is, first of all, to bring them with you to shul, obviously, to have a place for them to go when they want to play and relax, so they're not running around in the shul. If you find them running around in shul, you remind them this is a shul. Even if they're not davening at the time, it's a holy place. This is not the place to play. You want to play? There are places for that. This is not the place for it. You're not supposed to play hide and seek or tag or anything in the sanctuary. Sanctuary stays a sanctuary for a reason. All right, it's not just a big room to run around in. Obviously, as they grow older, you call them in for certain things that they can follow along with. With my son and with my daughters, I'd bring them in to say Shema with me when it was time to say Shema. Friday night, I would bring them. Definitely, they could be in the kids' room for most of the time, but for Lecha Dodi, I would have them come out, sing along as much as possible. If they knew the tune, especially helpful. I know a lot of Sephardic parents have their children sitting with them all the time, from like the youngest possible age. They're sitting with them. They might be playing with toys or whatever, but they're sitting with them. I'm not sure that that's effective for every child. If that works for your child, great. If not, I think my method, I think, can work for a lot of children. I've recommended it for other people, and it seems to work for others as well. Again, having the children there for some of the time, and especially for the things that they can follow along in. It's a funny thing. Speaking of chinuch and education, we'll probably eventually have to talk about schools. But one of the funny things about schools is that they teach children to pray, to daven, and almost everything they teach the kids to daven are things that we don't really focus on in a real shul. Ever notice that? So like your kids know how to sing Matovu, Adon Olam, Yigdal, to sing the brachot. And it takes them a good almost 15, 20 minutes to just do that. And they come to shul, we don't say Matovu out loud. We don't say Adon Olam in the beginning of services. We don't say Yigdal unless it might be at the end of services. And all of the brachot, they're chik-chak, Baruch Atah Hashem. We don't say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech. We don't sing it like that. It's a whole different experience. So that takes some getting used to. If you want your children to have that and still go to shul, then you should probably do that while they're still at home, right? Before you come to shul, map out a bit of time where you're going to say Matovu and Adon Olam and the brachot with your children before you bring them to shul, right? So that what they learn in school is not irrelevant to them, because otherwise what ends up happening is they say, oh, this is what we learn in school, and this is what we do in real life. So school and real life are two different things, and I don't need one or the other. I probably need real life. So I probably don't need whatever it is that's happening at school, and they end up not doing it. It's very similar to tzitzit. I don't know if you have ever noticed, but young children, young boys, wear tzitzit religiously. Like assuming you've taught them to do it. From the time that they're 3 years older, from the time that the halacha is from the time that they're able to not soil themselves. Right, that they're basically potty trained. By the time that they're potty trained, a boy is supposed to wear tzitzit, and they wear tzitzit basically their entire life. That's the idea. But what ends up happening very often, especially in modern Orthodox communities, is around age 11, 12, right around the time of bar mitzvah, for some reason you notice these boys aren't wearing tzitzit anymore. What happened? Well, you see, what happened was they started praying with the bigger kids in school, and they're not saying the blessing for tzitzit like they used to do in first, second, third grade, right? They have the boys say the bracha for tzitzit, the girls say the bracha for shasani kirtzono, right? So they don't do that anymore at the older grades. So the boys are, I don't need to do this anymore, apparently. This isn't real life anymore. So that's a very, very big problem in chinuch. We need to make sure that they know that what they're learning in school is relevant, and it's something that they should keep on using. There's a story told. Is this? I think I've mentioned the story in other contexts before. There's a story told about I think it was the Stipler. So no, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, I think. And somebody came to him and asked for a blessing, for advice about raising their children. They came with a child and they said, when should we start, really teaching our child Torah, really, you're doing all these things? And he said, well, you were supposed to do that after he was conceived. Right? You're supposed to start teaching your child all the way through. Even when he's in the womb, he's supposed to be learning Torah. We talked about this back in the pregnancy section of our life cycles class. So now the child is born. You're already late in the game. It doesn't mean it's all over, but you need to pick up you need to pick up the pace and start really learning what you can to teach your child. Teaching children is a very serious thing. It is a mitzvah from the Torah. Chinuch banim is a mitzvah from the Torah. It's in the Shema, right? We say that even when you're walking on the path, you're supposed to be teaching. You're supposed to vidibarta bam. You're supposed to be teaching to your children. You're supposed to be teaching Torah. Wherever you go, whatever you do, and that's exactly what I'm trying to get across, is this going on the path, this following in your ways is part of chinuch. Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman, there are a lot of books on parenting, a lot of books on parenting. One of my favorites. Which order should I go in here? I brought 3 here with me tonight. There's a lot more I have on my shelves at home. What I really wanted to show you and really discuss with you is Rav Shlomo, my Rebbe's Rebbe, Rav Shlomo Volbe, Zecher Tzedek Livracha, wrote Zriya Vinyan B'Chinuch. So this is a book on very short, as you can see, very short little booklet on how to best train children. And it was translated into English as Planting and Building, Raising a Jewish Child. And it was translated by another student of Rav Volbe, Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman, also known as Leib Kellerman. Anyway, so he also wrote a separate book, Lawrence Kellerman, who wrote lots of great books. Well, one of the great books he wrote is To Kindle a Soul, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Parents and Teachers, which is basically he's taking some of these ideas of education, and he makes it very, very powerful, and brings in other opinions and a lot of great charts about education, and just really makes it very, very readable and very powerful. If you don't mind, I would like to spend just a few minutes here, just reading you a few paragraphs from the prologue. He writes this very powerfully. I think the reason it will become very, very clear why I'm reading this. But basically, I want to, in case it's not clear, I want it to be. I want you to understand what I want to emphasize is how important chinuch is in Judaism. Okay, potential and reality. Prologue. It was a cold autumn evening, and the crisp breeze blowing in from the minivan's partially open back window felt good against my face. I rolled gently with the minivan as it careened through Jerusalem's tiny streets, some not much wider than the car. The driver and his friend were in a rush. Tonight was the first night of the Jewish month Elul, For millennia, Jews have viewed Elul, the month preceding the Jewish New Year, as a time to prepare for personal growth, a time to assemble a strategy for achieving new goals. Tonight, the two men in the front seat were on their way to hear the insights of a sage, a communal leader of Jerusalem's traditional Jewish community. The van stopped moving, the engine went silent, and before I even opened the minivan's door, my escorts were already out of the car and jogging down the street. I jumped out and sprinted after them, catching up with them just as they turned from the dimly lit road and headed down a narrow set of stairs leading to a large open courtyard. This courtyard, like most Jerusalem courtyards in the early evening, was filled with playing children. I had to dodge balls and skip over a few jump ropes as I made my way across it. I passed some parents who had come out to walk their children home and noticed some others standing by, quietly supervising the scene. Traditional Jews consider parenting an art and a privilege, and they take the whole endeavor very seriously. It's going to be crowded, one of my guides called back to me. Just stand against the wall next to me. The two men bounded across the courtyard toward a storefront. People were closing in on the storefront from all angles and streaming in through its inadequate entrance. Following the men inside, I passed through the crowd and found my spot along the side wall. People continued to pour into the room, and within 5 minutes, the aisles of sitting fathers and would-be fathers were completely full. There were probably more than 100 men crowded into the little lecture hall. It occurred to me then that in all the years I was involved with American secular education, I had never seen such a large crowd of men gathered to learn how to raise their children. These traditional Jews viewed educational issues as a province of both sexes. Just as traditional Jewish women wanted to learn how to be good mothers, traditional Jewish men wanted to learn how to be good fathers. And that's really the point. 15 minutes passed. Within 15 minutes, the room was packed. And what I want to emphasize is we take education and chinuch very, very seriously. It is not just a mitzvah. Like he said, it's an art and it's a privilege, and it has to be done very, very carefully. We want our children to love Judaism, to love Hashem, and to continue in our ways. And it's not a joking manner. It's not something that's just going to happen organically, right? It has to be done. There has to be some sort of way to do it. Now, the reason that the book that he quotes mostly, the Zriya Uvinyan, is called Zriya Uvinyan, which means planting and building. The reason for that is because Rav Shlomo Wolbe, his theory on education is very, very much based on these two words. Zriya, which means planting, and binyan, which means building. Because one is organic, literally planting. That's organic. That happens basically by itself. All creatures in nature reproduce. So that part, being fruitful, that's easy enough. But having a piano owning a piano does not make you a pianist, right? Having a child doesn't make you a parent. You actually have to do something. You have to work on the keys of the piano to master it. So you also have to build your child. And although building has something to do with something that's not natural, right? But because the child is also planted, you're supposed to use the child's, you're supposed to use the child's natural abilities, the child's natural talents. That looks good. The child's natural talents to make it so that the child grows to be the best that a child can be. Now, of course, each child is different, and that's why the pasuk in Mishlei tells us that you're supposed to build a child according to his or her strengths, right? Everybody has their own abilities, and everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses, and we have to use those. There's natural growth that can come from synthetic growth, right? In other words, the natural is like the planting, right? The natural child, the natural whims and abilities of a child, and then your emphasis on it, your input as a parent is sort of synthetic, sort of artificial, but that artificial element can work into the organic. What do I mean? So take, for example, and we sort of discussed this in other contexts in the past. Take, for example, the idea that we have that people are born under certain mazalot, they're born under certain influences, right? Somebody can be born under, for instance, the mazel of Mars. Now, I understand the Gemara tells us that Ein Mazel b'Yisrael, and that Mazel doesn't have really a strong influence on Jewish people, but that's only really if a Jewish person is filled with Torah, because Torah is sort of like the antidote to the natural, to how you would ordinarily be. So let's say somebody's born under Mars. So that is supposed to mean that naturally that person is inclined towards bloodshed, towards possibly hurting others, or possibly just seeing blood. So maybe this person can be taught not to be a killer, and can be taught to be a soldier fighting for a good cause, or to be a doctor who's fixing people, who also, by the way, has to see, a share of blood. So all of that's possible with the right kind of education. So what does that have to do with Torah? So it has everything to do with Torah, because Torah has in it a huge ocean of possibility. Right? You could have all kinds of things taught to you, and if it's not taught to you in a proper way, you could take it and run with it in the wrong direction. We've mentioned this before, again in the Parsha class, but it's worth mentioning here that in Ha'azinu, in the poem of Ha'azinu in the Torah, the Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Let my Torah rain down to you like rain, like water." And the Vilna Gaon's famous commentary on that is, why is Torah like water? Because Torah makes everything grow. Torah makes good things grow, just like water makes all good plants grow. But water can also help weeds grow, and bad plants, and poison ivy, or all kinds of terrible things. Torah can help that grow too. So if you have bad midot, says the Vilna Gaon, if you have bad midot, obviously the Torah is going to help you with your good midot. If you have good midot, you're a good, generous person by nature, and you're going to learn Torah, you're going to learn how to be even a more generous person, a more good person. You're going to excel in the goodness. But gooder, yes. But if you have bad midot, says the Vilna Gaon, if you have bad midot going into it, chas v'chalila, then what the Torah is going to give you is it's going to give you the strength to use those bad midot for bad. You're going to learn how to be a worse person. The Torah can teach you that. It's a scary thought. Torah is supposed to be enlightening. It's supposed to build the Adam. Our goal in Chinuch, by the way, is to build the Adam, to build the person. For boys or girls, even though we say Adam. We're not discriminating by gender quite yet. The point of Torah is to grow, but you have to have good midot going into it. That's why we say Reshit Chachma Yirat Hashem. The beginning of Chachma, the beginning of wisdom, before you get to Torah, you need to already have the good midot. You need to have Yirat Shamayim. You have the Yirat Hashem. The issue of girls' education is worth bringing up at this point. I know we only have like 15 minutes in the class, and this is a huge can of worms. But when have I shied away from that? If we're not done with the subject, we can continue next week as well. If you have questions about it, you know where to go to ask questions. The girls have been educated in Judaism all along, throughout our history. Those of you who grew up like I did with the images of like Yentl, where she was taught Torah secretly by her father, and then her father died. So to keep learning Torah, her only option Her only option was to dress up as a yeshiva bacher and go to yeshiva. Right? So if that's what you think about Jewish education for girls, you have another thing coming. First of all, back to the Talmud. The Talmud talks about teaching girls Torah. Now, it obviously doesn't recommend teaching girls the more esoteric stuff, or let's call it the more practically irrelevant stuff, right? Because there are streams of Torah. There's, like I said, it's an ocean. You can learn all kinds of things. You can learn practical things, or you can take your time away from the practical and learn more sort of mystical things, or quote unquote theoretical things, and that's not going to be useful. And again, what that's going to cause, says the Gemara, it's going to cause a girl to think that Torah is this irrelevant thing. Just like we were talking about earlier about school children who are taught, davening in school, and the davening in shul is a completely different experience. So too, we need to realize that Torah is supposed to teach you what real life is, and anything else is supposed to be not Torah. So we don't want people to divorce Torah from reality. So for boys, they do learn the theoretical things usually, because there's a potential for those boys to take on future careers, like being a judge or something like that, where they're going to need to know all the theoreticals. They're going to need to know the details. How did this law become this law? What's the history of this? What's the, what's the converse of this reality? And those sorts of situations. When that happens, then it becomes relevant. Even the irrelevant becomes more relevant. But what's relevant is halakha for everybody. Boys and girls need to know halakha. Not only that, but boys and girls, to learn halakha, they need to know how to read. And we mentioned in the Parsha class last week how important it is to know the difference between a Torah law and a rabbinic law and a minhag and a lower level of minhag, of just things people have started accepting upon themselves. So chumrah, stringency, every single person who keeps Torah law needs to know the differences between those things. And that takes time, and that takes learning, and that takes the ability to read, which is why amongst all ancient cultures that I've studied, there might be things I haven't learned, but of all ancient cultures I've studied, literacy, especially amongst girls, is the highest of anybody else, right? Girls needed to know how to read. And by the way, a girl was basically required to be able to read the details of a get, of a divorce document. We're supposed to be able to read that and understand that for it to be a relevant document. Right? It's a legal document. So you're agreeing to it when you take it. If you don't know what it says, what are you agreeing to? So you can't just believe whatever you're told it says. You're supposed to go in the times of the Gemara, right? 1,500 years ago, girls were expected to know how to read, just to be able, at least to be able to read that, which is, by the way, not a simple document. I have trouble reading a get. Okay, so not to compare myself to the people who lived 1,500 years ago, but it's a legal document. There's legalese in it, just like even in English, a legal document, escrow papers or whatever, require some sort of skill to be able to read that. So too, a get requires a certain level of skill that girls were expected to have. That's an amazing thought. Aside from that, we have in our possession, we have the autobiographies, the diaries written by religious Jewish girls throughout our history, right? We've had I forget her name of Hamlin, right? What's her name? Gretel? No, I forget her name. Very famous diary written by a lady living in the Middle Ages. There's throughout it, we don't have a dark ages like some other people do. We know exactly what we thought when we thought it, and who our whole history is seamless. And in our history, we've always had educated women. Not a question. Now, you might have noticed though that there was about 100 years ago, there was a whole movement towards something called the Beit Yaakov movement, the Beit Yaakov schools. The reason for that movement was not because girls were ignorant, but because the majority of people were beginning to send their girls to public high schools, the non-Jewish schools, where they were learning all kinds of philosophies and literature and other things. They were confusing them from Judaism. And again, what Judaism became to a lot of people was the opposite of real life. There's real life, which includes Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and Victor Hugo and everything else. And then there's Judaism. It's on this other shelf. It's this whole other thing that's not real life. It's just this cultural thing that we do for to keep on our traditions. But it's not real. It doesn't really fit with my real life. So to avoid that from happening, a group of people, mostly Sarah, did I mess up her last name? Shanir, not Shanirson. Sarah Shanir, yeah. Sarah Shanir. So she started the Beis Yaakov movement and got eventually cajoled the Ger Rebbe and the Chafetz Chaim and others to support it. And it started because so many Hasidic girls were not being taught Torah, mostly because of the poverty that they were experiencing. Keep in mind that they could either go to a public school for free, or be, or somebody had to educate them in Judaism. Who's going to educate them? That costs money. Just like nowadays, so many people send their kids to public school because Jewish schools are so expensive. So too, that was happening already then. And to avoid, especially girls, because really our Judaism is run by the mother in a home, right? That's the Em Habayit. That's where we get emuna from. That's where we get emet. So therefore, we really needed to make sure that the women were educated, and that's what happened in that particular situation. But before that, before the school system that the Beis Yaakov school represents, the girls were learning in the home, even in Yentl. Even in Yentl, before her father died, she was learning. Okay, all in secret, like he was all afraid people might find out he's teaching his daughter. But there in real life, what was really going on then was, yes, fathers were teaching their daughters, but they weren't afraid of that. It wasn't something to keep secret. They were teaching their daughters halacha. They were teaching their daughters parsha, chumash. Girls often read. I don't have it here. I don't see it here, but it's something. There used to be a classic book that girls would read. They would read. It's called the Weekly Midrash. So it was like basically the midrash on the parsha, and that's one of the things they would read. Okay, again, literacy. They would read. They would, as we said when we started our Ein Yaakov class, they would learn Ein Yaakov. They would learn those parts of the Gemara that are in Yaakov, because again, that's the relevant parts. That's the parts where it's real life. This is how you can apply this to how you live, which is the main thing about education. Again, is that we want to teach children to love Judaism, to love mitzvot, and to see that it's relevant in their lives. So that's true for boys, and of course that's true for girls, in many ways even more so. So I think I probably have more to say on the subject, and I want to get into the school systems and the history of them also, but there's just not enough time right now for that. So I'm going to open up for I'm going to stop the recording and stop the live stream to Facebook. We'll open up to questions, and we'll go into the history of schoolhouses and education outside of the private stream, which is what like private tutoring, which is what education used to be and still is in the ideal. And we'll talk about that next time. So let's stop the live stream and the recording. And